So I'm back inside my original lamp object, and I have all of these parts grouped as my lower arm. I'm going to take my lower arm design and I'm going to copy it and paste it. And so I get a duplicate, I get a lower arm 1. I'm just immediately going to rename this and I'll call it upper arm. And that'll give me the ability to kind of differentiate the two. And I'll take that upper arm and I'll just move it and stack it on top of the other one. Now, the glitch that I'm going to have that I need to work out is that these brackets kind of meet end to end, and that's not such a big deal, but I really want to think about the intersection of these parts, and so I'm really going to think about, I don't want to just kind of stick these things together like so and have them overlap and say, okay, well that's the design of this thing, or if I do want to use that as the example, I really want to rethink the intersection of this stuff. So that's the stuff that's going to take quite a bit of time trying to figure out how I want this whole object to be built. And so maybe I could move this whole thing over and just use one bracket here. And even though I'll be missing some details, I think I can really quickly get away with something like this. So I'll just dig inside and start to figure out where these different screws are. And I'll get rid of the stuff that I don't need so I have fewer variables to contend with. And with just these couple little screw heads, I think I can pull them out, lift them up, just kind of slide them around and make them make sense inside my design. So whenever I need a really precise view, I'll look at this through the front viewport, make sure that I'm looking at it through the right view, but as long as I'm restricting my motion to one axis at a time, they might not be completely symmetrical or completely perfect, but again, this is a detail that'll start to make sense after a while. So I'll take that whole upper arm object, and what I want to do is look at these screws and decide where they're going to interact, how they're going to attach together. So I think I can take a really precise view of this front viewport. I'm tapping the S key. And really what I want to do is just kind of move this whole thing right about so. And I'll just suggest that that upper arm has one bracket, and by kind of moving these parts around, now they don't seem so arbitrary. They don't seem so stuck together, right? So they're actually kind of starting to line up and interact with each other. Okay, now obviously I only have the front half of my lamp designed, and if I really wanted this to be a little bit more precise, I would, duplicate this bracket and flip it on the other side, at least where it's appropriate. But here this seems to be working pretty well. And I'll cheat this object out because this was an extrusion, right? This first bracket was an extrusion. And so if I just take that, and I know that if I start to change the movement, that'll make this a little bit wider. So I'll bump that up just a bit. And I'll take that whole bracket and just kind of slide it over to make a little bit more sense of it. There, and those are just about touching. They're not quite. There's a little bit of air between the two of them, but now I have this kind of thinner bracket on the outside, a more substantial bracket in the center, and of course I'll continue to refine that whole design. But now when I look at this lamp, it's starting to come together. It's starting to make a whole lot of sense. And I have this upper arm object now that's a group, and I can just test that by moving that whole thing around, and the whole thing moves. I have this lower arm object. I move that around, and all the stuff moves. I got a few details that are missing, but now when I select the lower arm, I'm going to ask myself, where do I want this to rotate around? So I'm thinking about the lower arm. If I restrict its rotation, obviously I don't want it rotating in the center of itself. I want it rotating precisely on that screw head down here. I've thought about the way that this object goes together, and that screw head would actually be the physical pivot point of this lamp object, at least according to the design that I created. So if I just jump into the front view, I'll zoom out just a little bit. With that lower arm selected, I'll separate the axis and I'll move that down. And here I'll want to zoom in and get really close to this. I don't have to be perfect, but the rotation point should actually be at the center of this sphere that creates the screw head. I'll just move that up. That looks pretty good. and I'll make sure I toggle that axis button off, because I don't want to be trying to move objects around, just be flinging that axis around. So I'll zoom out a little bit, and as I'm making these changes, I want to go to the rotate tool and just rotate it and test it. And that's it, working exactly how I had hoped it would work. It's rotating right around the proper point. I feel like I'm making progress, and so I'll give it a quick save incremental, and I'll press on forward. So I'll grab the upper arm, and just like I did with the lower arm, I want to move the axis, and I'll move that down around the point that I want it to rotate around. In this case, it's really just that other screw head. So I'll zoom way in on this. I'll move this down. I don't have to zoom in too much closer, but I feel like that's right where I want it to zoom in, or right where I want it to rotate, excuse me. I'll toggle that rotation off, and I'll just test that really quickly. So I'll rotate the top. That rotates around the point that I want. I'll grab the lower arm. That's going to rotate around the point that I want, and now I just need to build that parent-child relationship. And remember, the lower arm is the thing that I want to move and have the upper arm move with it, and so that means that the lower arm is going to be the parent. And if it's the parent, the lower arm needs to be the upper arm needs to be inside the lower arm. In other words, the parent object is going to remain on the object manager hierarchy here. So the lower arm is the parent. That means I'll take the upper arm and drag it into the lower arm. And if that's still a little abstract for you, just try it one way or the other, and you can always test it by grabbing the upper arm object or lower arm object and move it and see if you get the results that you want. I'll grab the upper arm and I'll move it. That seems to be working just fine, right where I want it. I'll leave it in that position temporarily. I'll go find the lower arm object and I'll move that, and that's working just the way that I want it to. I still need to deal with the base, and if I'm feeling confident at this point, I can just start to throw the lower arm into the base object, and now I have a setup where I'll jump into the perspective viewport. This is really starting to come together. I can take the base and kind of rotate that around. I can take the lower arm, move that into a position. I'll take the upper arm and move that where I want it. And so now I just need to start thinking about the bell housing for the lamp. I want to start thinking about all the details that are going to go into this lamp, like an extension cord, a switch, and all the details that'll make it really convincing that this isn't just a combination of cylinders and cubes that come together to create this object, but it truly is, an illustration of a working object. So in the next presentation, I'll run through really quickly setting up the bell housing using the workflow and strategies that we're already aware of. We'll use a lathe NURBS and splines to create that. And then we'll take a deeper dive into lighting. In the meantime, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a real simple black texture, or whatever color I want my lamp, and I'm going to apply the black texture to most of these objects. I might do like a charcoal gray and a black to really differentiate the frame objects from the brackets, and maybe a different color for the screws as well, and that'll imply that they're made of different materials, despite being close and similar in color. But I'll do that offline. That'll basically be just a real simple workflow, and we'll take a closer look at the lighting for this scene, but we'll do that in the next presentation.